Um,
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to another episode of Endurance Chat. My name is Michael Zalavari, and today we are talking about the Centenary event of the Le Mans 24 Hours. That's it. We're finally here. It's taken us, but we're doing this. It's the Centenary event. We've been building up to this edition of Le Mans for years and years and years now, and it is finally upon us, and it is just an absolute... It's scary to think about. It's scary to think about this race being run for now 100 years. So, what a wild time we're in. And joining me today as we go through all the things you need to know about 24 Hours of Le Mans, I am joined by Josh Cronin, JebTheRebel. Good evening for you, Jeb. How are you doing?
yeah, I'm doing all right. Currently, literally just hit 9:15 p.m. on the Eastern Seaboard. So we're going to be burning the midnight oil here. Unfortunately, my coffee does not have caffeine in it. But we're talking about sports car racing, which is usually something that I'm known for talking about. So that should be fun. I can't wait to dig into 100 years.
100 years.
Of debatably the most prestigious race on the planet. But that's a whole conversation.
Are we allowed to have you on the podcast now that you've said that? Or do we just delete you from this?
I mean, 8500's tomorrow, but we're not going to have, we actually, I remember having a very long debate in the server about what was more prestigious of a race, because they're both historic, right? Yeah. One's actually older. That was a whole debate. Anyway, we'll talk about that some other time.
That is another argument we can have another time. Jeb.
That's multiple cans of worms there.
Jeb, the 24 Hours of Le Mans, it is, as you said, arguably one of the most, the most prestigious motor race in the world. It is one prong.
I would say it is
of the motorsport Triple Crown. The other two being, of course, the Indy 500 and the Monaco Grand Prix. It is the absolute pinnacle of sports car racing, and the peak test of endurance. Just what an event, right? What an event! It is, yeah, the pinnacle of motor racing, endurance racing. People build cars to come here and race and win. Just it's amazing. Every year it sneaks up on me, and every year I'm so much more hype for the 24 hours. Like, what is your key thing about the Le Mans 24 hours that keeps you coming back to watch?
In all honesty, it's probably, I'm also just a nerd, so I just like history and legacy. That is undoubtedly a part of it, but it is probably just the concept of we have multiple endurance races. We have the Rolex 24, we have Sebring 12 hours, we have the Nürburgring 24, the Spa 24. Those are all great in their own regards, right? But this is kind of the first race to do that.
Yeah.
So I can kind of respect the tradition and the history of it. But it is also, it's the grandest stage. When you actually look at through racing and the automotive industry as a whole, how many things date back to Le Mans and the Le Mans 24 hours. It really is kind of really is kind of the mecca of sports car racing, debatably of racing, with the amount of history that's there. And so, when there's something that could be considered hallowed ground in the sport, you're going to jump at any chance you can to get there. That's why I'm going there this year, is because I've heard they run a race there. Yeah, I've heard they run a race there in June. I'm going to go check it out. But yeah, it really is. I mean, it's just it's hard to encompass with words why people and myself keep going back to watch the Le Mans 24 hour every year, because it really is. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's not normal. Like, you're like, it's a 24-hour race that takes up a weekend, and it's usually Father's Day, which you should be spending with your fathers, people. But it's so captivating. There's so much to it that we're going to hopefully talk about over the next 90 minutes. That will help explain maybe to people who are a bit less knowledgeable in the sport and the race, to kind of move them over to the dark side, if you will.
Yes, once you're in, you never leave at sports cars. It's wonderful. And you touched on a few really key things there. Like, this was really the first test of motor racing, of cars. The whole philosophy of this event, going back to its origins in 1923, was, could a car do this? Could a car run continuously for 24 hours. And you said it yourself, there's so many things that have their origins, have their starting points as part of this event. And there's something that I say that, I keep finding more evidence for, is that it all comes back to Le Mans. Things like, improvements in safety in road cars, improvements in technology in road cars, improvements in racing and in officiating and in procedures. They all somehow trace their way back to this event, this drive down a country road, a country highway in the north of France. It's wonderful and incredible how much this one event, cooked up by some crazy Frenchmen to see whether or not you could get a car to run 24 hours in a row without it breaking down, has permeated through the world of not just racing, but of motoring as well.
Yeah, I mean, and even just to touch on that too, things that we still have nowadays that trace their origins to the race. Porsches have keys, or Porsches, depending on how fancy you are. Their keys are still on the left because of that, because of the traditional Le Mans start, which we'll talk about a bit later, I'd imagine. How many, if you look even throughout history, how many cars have models or trims or even whole car models from a manufacturer themselves that are named after Le Mans or Mulsanne, stuff like that, right? And so it really is, it's hard to put into words how much this race and this particular small section of French highway permeated throughout the industry.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the philosophy of the event. We already mentioned that its origins come along as a test of reliability. Could a car, like these newfangled contraption, these motorized carts, get around a circuit for 24 hours? Could they run continuously? Could they survive? Could they be repaired? Could they run efficiently for 24 hours without breaking down, without having to pull off to the side and stop? This was the philosophy of those first races, those early challenges for motor racing, and it's grown into something that's maybe not quite the same as those humble origins, but the true test of reliability here is, can you get a car to run for 24 hours? Can you beat the event first before you beat your competitors? And that's something that has been a constant throughout the entirety of Le Mans' now 100-year history. And it is the event itself that is the hardest part to beat, and no one knows that more than, Toyota.
Yeah, and that's a whole, I mean, we could probably, looking at a run sheet, we can probably start in about the 80s and just keep bringing them up, keep bringing up little blips, the hot maps, the hot points, if you will, of the entire Toyota versus Le Mans case.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, no, you're right. The aspect of the reliability and getting a car to last that long is kind of the interesting part of it, right? It's just, I've always said, and of course I mean this not wishing any harm or anything, but it always is incredibly funny. One of the funniest things in the world is when a car breaks down and it's not yours, right? On the same time, one of the worst things in the world is when your car breaks down. So it's incredibly funny to see, multi-million-dollar race teams have weird failures. I'm not talking like, they got a flat tire, they blew the engine, but weird failures like, hey, this headlight doesn't work anymore and we don't know why. And so they got to start pulling fuses at 3 a.m. Right? That's the endearing part, where it's like, you need to cross all of your T's, dot all of your I's if you want to win this race. And this was kind of the first race to do that.
And absolutely. And the test of running for 24 hours on what mostly amounts to public highway, as you said, produces some really weird things that happen. Like, we've seen in the past, we've seen things like bodywork just completely fall apart and come off the car. We've seen ignition wires just pop off engines, and there's a famous story of 1983 where Derek Bell, in the middle of the night, after finally taking the lead, had to pull the entire rear half of a Porsche 962, which is not a small feat. That's a very long car, off, just to plug in a wire that had popped off. It was the only change he had to make. But he had to do that by himself. He had to pull the entire back end of the car off and plug in a wire to get going again. We've seen things like full rear end changes to replace a gearbox. Yep. Audi R8, They did that in 5 minutes? They lost one lap, changing an entire gearbox and rear assembly as an innovative solution to a problem they were having. We've seen turbos blow up and have to be repaired. We've seen cars cross the finish line and break at the end of the 24 hours. We've seen cars cross the finish line and break one lap before the end of the 24 hours. It's a unique challenge, and as the technology has improved, you come up with these innovative solutions to solve these problems. And, it wasn't all that long ago, Jeb, that we were talking about prototypes having brake changes in the 24 hours, prototypes filling up oil, having to stop for extended periods of time to change oil filters, water filters, change parts on the engine. That just doesn't seem to happen anymore. One of the things about this event is that it really pushes designers to make cars that are easily repairable and that can last, because every second you're in the pits, you're not out on the racetrack. What sort of things can you think of that have been improvements to car design because of the challenge of this event?
I think the main key, in all honesty, probably is quick swap parts. I mean, if you're in typically a non-endurance race, like a sprint race of some form, think like a Trans Am or something like that. If you break something, wishbone, whatever, you usually just call it. It's usually not worth it to repair it and go 30 laps down in a 50-lap race. Some teams will, spirit of endurance and all that, but it usually is not worth that. But over 24 hours, a lot can change. And so teams being able to take parts and go, particularly with LMP2s, I think is kind of the best example of this. They'll have entire corner assemblies, upper wishbone, lower wishbone, spring, and all the fixings realigned so that if they ever broke a corner in a race, they can just pull it off and drop it on and get it out. They don't have to go find all of those parts and their fasteners in the garage, in the in the lorries in the back, in the toolboxes on the floors and everything. They can just go boop boop, pull it out, put a new one in. That'll make a difference, because a difference between 1 lap and 2 lap at Le Mans, it is a big deal, but it's not really going to matter unless you have a yellow, which we'll talk about safety cars later. But that ability to just quick change parts is a big deal, even if you just look at pit stop technology for tires, right? Like back in ye good old days, tires were like a long time. You usually just try to finish the race on your tires, but you obviously can't do that with a 24-hour race, right? So I think just kind of the refinement of the repair process is kind of the biggest deal in terms of Le Mans.
Yeah, and that's something we've seen more and more as time has gone on, as we've gotten into this era of optimization with race cars. Things that used to, take minutes or even, tens of minutes, 20 minutes or something, now take 2 or 3, because the cars are designed in such a way that they can be modular, that they can be changed quickly. And also, even things that take a long period of time can have an effect on the race. Like, I remember this is a very famous 2017 event where in the first hour of the race, the Porsche number 2 car had a problem with its front hybrid regenerating system, and they had to pull it into the pits and swap it out. And they did that in, I think, about 50 minutes. So they were 14 laps down at the beginning of the race, in the first hour of the race. But what happened during the night is that all of their competitors ran into problems, and when their sister car failed in the morning of the race, they were all of a sudden in a position to win that race, but they had to pass 3 or 4 other lower class cars to get there. And that was like, they did that with like an hour to spare, and it was absolutely raucous, because it wasn't just the drivers who won that race, it was the team who did that repair. And that's something we haven't yet talked about. It's a multi-class event. So, in the past, the cars had been separated based on their engine displacement. So you had like a 2-liter class, a 5-liter class, etc., etc. Nowadays, it's a bit different, but we still have this tradition of cars from multiple classes racing on the same track. So you effectively have 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 races happening at once on the same track. And traffic all of a sudden becomes a very key component in how you manage traffic and how you drive through traffic in order to continue to keep your speed. That's a different challenge that a lot of people may not have encountered before, and something you don't really see in a lot of motorsports unless you really seek it out. So, if for example, things like Formula 1 or IndyCar or supercars or even GT3 racing around the world, there isn't really a lot of multi-class events that get a lot of high-profile action. So, yeah, traffic and traffic management. How do you go about doing that in a way that's, safe? Safe and fast.
The main key, the core of it is to be smart about it. However, you are also asking racing drivers to be smart about it, which causes problems. And they usually don't like doing that. But the actual answer is you have to be smart with it. And that's why teams that win Le Mans, drivers who do well at Le Mans, I guess is how I would phrase it, they know when to take risks and when not to. Obviously, you hear nowadays it's a 24-hour sprint race. You're driving flat out. The technology has evolved where you mechanically, you're pretty much fine at the end of the 24 hours. It's just a matter of pace, right? But because of that, you don't have to drive at 100% all the time. Well, sorry. They expect you to drive at 100% all the time, but you don't have to because you have to worry about the lower cars. So the guys who are good don't drive at 100% all the time because they exercise caution with getting around lapped cars because they recognize, well, it doesn't matter if over a stint you're 30 seconds faster because you just absolutely nuke it in on GTs going into Mulsanne and stuff like that, or Mulsanne corner, because the one time that you don't clear him, the one time he doesn't see you will end your race. And teams usually get really upset when you crash multi-million-dollar prototypes, right? So
yeah, that's not ideal.
So that causes problems. So the guys who are really good at the multi-class, they know, in my opinion, the guys who are good at the multi-class prototypes are the guys who came from GTs because they know what to expect, right? It's generally accepted that the GTs will hold their line and the prototypes will go around them, right? That is generally accepted.
Yeah.
So that's the keys. The guys who have the experience of, okay, he will hold this. Now, eventually, every once in a while, you will see him move out of the way. But that is the main thing, is the guys who know how to navigate the traffic. They know this is an okay spot to pass. This is a spot to pass. This is a no-go zone, right? Good examples, Porsche curves, right?
Oh, yeah,
You have to know what you have to know. Like you need to start your pass going into the Porsche curves. If you catch a GT in the Porsche curve, in let's call it like the second or third apex, you really should be waiting until the exit.
Yeah.
Right. Getting a pass through karting. I think it's called karting.
Yeah.
Right?
The last corner.
Yeah.
Of the Porsche
sorry. I could have sworn to change names. That is a difficult corner. A, you're probably going to slow both of you guys down if you try and pass in that corner. But B, we've seen cars go side to side and then they spin and whatever. Right. The guys who are fast and the guys who win Le Mans and the guys who win Le Mans multiple times know when and where to pass and when and where to wait. Because on paper, it looks, wow, you went 3 seconds a lap slower. That guy sucks. That was a bad move. But the main important key, he did not crash his car.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's absolutely the key thing. It's something that Lena Gade used to say when she was a race engineer, car manager for one of the Audi LMP1 teams, was that you got to push without risk.
I think that's a great motto. It's a great motto to live by. You have to push without risk. It is generally accepted, especially in racing, that there will be some sort of risk associated with anything you do, right? Yeah. The key is smart risk. Smart risk is, I'm in a car going really fast. Dangerous risk is, I'm in a car going really fast. I'm going to pass a car that's going not as fast as me at a spot that might not work, right? Usually in racing, mights or could or possiblies usually aren't good.
And
so he probably sees me is a really bad presumption to go by when you go around the outside through Mulsanne corner.
Yeah, and it's something that is a very different philosophy to like touring car racing or sprint racing or F1 racing, where it is go all the time. Over the course of 24 hours, one mistake can end your race, and if you keep taking risks and playing chances with the lower class cars, eventually it won't pay off. And there is a litany of videos on YouTube or whatever of cars, of drivers making poor decisions in traffic. And all you have to do is look up, say, Alan McNish at 2011, or Audi at 2011, or Alex Davison at Mulsanne Corner, or whatever. The number of times that a higher class car has had their race ruined, or has ruined a lower class car's race by making contact at a part of the track where they have not been seen or they have not been expected to be there, is it's one of the cornerstones of Le Mans. It's one of the fascinating things about this race because it can all be going so well, and it just takes a split second for it to all fall apart.
Yeah, it is something unique, and that's historically, you saw drivers would struggle with that. Drivers would come from, as it was called at the time, Grand Prix racing.
You're absolutely right. It's something that has been a challenge for drivers coming through, and another big challenge of that is also the circuit itself. It is a bit of a unique challenge in motorsport. There's nothing really that long. Except for maybe the Nürburgring Nordschleife, but with this sort of characteristic. So the current circuit exists as, 13.26 kilometers, which works out to be, 13.626. I missed the digit there. Which works out to be about 8.5 miles, of, racetrack, half of which is everyday road, half of which is the Mulsanne Highway between Le Mans and Mulsanne. And the rest of it is, permanent racetrack that only ever gets used for this event, which means that, as the week progresses, the track really rubbers in and really starts to feel more and more safe and more grippy. But of course, being part public road means there's a lot of considerations to deal with on the long Mulsanne Straight. 13.62 kilometers, that's a long circuit, and that means that if something goes wrong at very early on the lap, you've got a long way to carry an issue before you can get back to the pits.
Yeah, and that's the other key. I mean, we've seen cars have mechanical problems early in the lap, and it's like, well, guess what? You're limping it back now. This isn't the Nordschleife. You don't have a Grand Prix Strek kind of do-over. You don't get the mulligan of looping back into the pits and like, okay, we'll just discount your lap. It's like, no, like you've made your bed. You will now sleep in it.
Yeah, and like we've seen race leaders come to cropper in the opening part of the lap and just have failed before they get to the end. Because one of the things as well that we haven't quite talked about is that part of the whole shtick about pushing technology and reliability is that you must get to the pits. Like, if you have a problem on track, if you can't get to the pits, if your car comes to a stop and is unrecoverable, then you are out of the race. And we've seen time and time again things like that's why, the story about Derek Bell pulling the half of the 962 rather off to try and fix the problem is so incredible. It's because if he didn't do that, if he didn't diagnose that problem and get it back to the pits, that car would have been out of the race. And like we saw it happen to Toyota like 3 or 4 times over the course of the last decade. A small problem, something like a wiring loom melting at the wrong part of the circuit, can ruin your race. Getting a puncture in the first corner can ruin your race. It's one of those unique sort of challenges where if you are unable to limp your car home, that is it. You are done. And 13 kilometers is a long way to limp your car home.
Right. I mean, exactly. There's a reason it is a race that manufacturers have fought for years and years to win. And there's a reason the manufacturers will openly admit and are proud that they have won this race, is because it really is the ultimate test of endurance.
So the track itself, we've sort of said it's 13.6 kilometers. We've said it uses public road. There's a few things about it though that are beyond that pretty unique. One thing that I've just seen looking at the Wikipedia page for the track is that you spend over 80% of your lap on full throttle here. Now, when we talk about pushing engines, transmissions, and cars to their absolute limit, 80% of the lap at full throttle, that is a lot. And it's not just that as well. You go from, under 100 kilometers per hour to over 300 kilometers per hour 5 times over the course of the lap. If that's not adding strain to components, geez, I don't know what is. Can you think of any other track in the world where over the course of 3.5 minutes, 4 minutes, you're going from 100 to 300 that often, that quickly?
No.
Exactly.
The cop-out answers are the Nürburgring or Daytona, but even then, the numbers don't add up.
Even at Daytona, even if you're using the 24-hour loop, you're doing that once a lap, getting up to that sort of speed. And,
yeah,
and that's once every 2 minutes effectively. It's something that is completely foreign, and that's why the cars that do well here are designed specifically for this one track.
Right, yeah. And I mean, that's a whole other thing we can talk about later, too, during our endurance part, is, the one-offs where it's like, well, we're just going to build this car for Le Mans.
Yeah.
And it'll suck at every other circuit, but it's going to do really good at Le Mans. Well, go ahead.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. That is the pull of this event. We try, well, not we try, the World Endurance Championship exists because we want a series to get value out of building cars for Le Mans. And I mean, no, but the World Endurance Championship wouldn't exist without this event, and I don't think there'd be too many people who disagree with that.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. If you disagree with that, it'd have to be a really good argument because it's not the 6 hours of Monza that's keeping the series up. It's a neat event. That's a good event. It's probably one of the better events, actually. It's great, but that is not the cornerstone of the series. Exactly.
This is the cornerstone of the series. This track...
the keystone of the series.
Pretty much. This track has a few really cool elements, and I just do want to pull apart the certain sections of the track because, while it is very much on throttle and very long straights, the corners of this track have their own personality, and they really can't be sort of, forgotten about. You can set up a car here with the absolute minimum of downforce and, run it as a straight line bullet, but then you've come afoul of things like, the Porsche curves, Tertre Rouge, where you've really got to load the car in on the aerodynamics to get through. It's a very delicate balancing act, and one of the things I think the circuit has done well is that each change that they have made, because, over the course of 100 years, there's been plenty of changes, it's added something to the circuit instead of taking it away. We've got the high-speed sections of the Forest S's, Tertre Rouge, Indianapolis, which I think is one of my favorite corners in the world, and the Porsche curves. And then you've got these really low-speed sections, the Mulsanne corners, the Mulsanne chicanes, the Mulsanne corner, Arnage, and the Ford chicanes. Each one of these corners has its own story, and they're all very unique in the way that they're put about. Jeb, what's your favorite part of the track and why?
That's actually a really good question. Tertre Rouge is fun.
Yep. Why is Tertre Rouge fun?
And then it's just the high speed. There's one turn in, bang, hit the apex right, and you run it, and you just get the good feeling of, I have carried a ton of speed onto this very long straightaway, and just nailing that corner is just that, including maybe the exit of the Forest S's too. I'd group both of those together as just, when you get both of those, I mean, it's just like butter smooth. What else? I'm gonna go with Indianapolis. Obviously, just the quick flick in, using the downforce to get the car turned, and then braking and hoping you don't hit the tire wall. It's so satisfying when it gets right, and it looks awesome too.
That is true.
That helps.
And the reason it's called Indianapolis is because the massive banking on that corner. You're coming down through the trees from Mulsanne, and then you've got this kink that you take at 300 kilometers per hour, get the car slowed down to get into this banking that's on the left. We're turning left, which is you barely ever turn left at Le Mans. And you just got to get it tucked into the banking, hope everything sticks, and then you shoot out to the slowest corner on the track, which is the very flat Arnage, which is a 90-degree right-hander. And if you go off at Arnage, you're literally in someone's front garden, which I always find hilarious.
Right, yeah, which is another reason why Arnage is a funny corner.
Yeah,
Arnage is a weird corner because on paper, I mean, it's a 90-degree right. I'm gonna be honest. It's pretty basic. It's a 90-degree right-hand corner. But the amount of professional, paid by a manufacturer, racing drivers that mess up that corner is it's an anomaly how high that number is.
Yeah, well,
is it because it should not be that hard? It's just a 90-degree right, but there's something about it that just catch people. I think it's like catching GTs. Maybe it's just because it is so low speed compared to the other ones that throws them off. I don't know why. It's a mystery.
Well, yeah, I'd say maybe because you've spent so much time at such high speed that when you take all of the downforce off of the car suddenly like that makes everything a lot harder. Because it's not an easy corner because it's kind of off cambered as well. So it's a very sort of difficult little thing that you've got to negotiate after you've just gone 300 kilometers per hour through a kink, 180 kilometers per hour on a bank turn, and try to navigate a GT car that's going a lot slower than you as you dive to the apex of this 60 kilometer per hour right-hander that's completely flat. It just kind of comes out of nowhere, it seems to feel like.
Yeah, you could do a full hour-long documentary on just why Arnage catches people out, and I don't have an answer for you. It just does. It's just because it's the corner that's different.
Yeah.
If Arnage was a second now, if Arnage was a third gear, a sweeper, if it was just Indianapolis, but a gap
the other way around,
way, we would not be having this conversation right now. We would just be like, oh yeah, also Arnage exists. So there's something about it. They've done something to that corner in some way. Something is amok. There's something up.
It's pretty cool. It's a lot of personality. I think Arnage is one of the corners that has gone through the smallest amount of changes over its 100-year history. Because even in the first editions of Le Mans, Indianapolis and Arnage were still the same as they are now. There's been updates to, the curbing, and it's now a permanent racetrack as opposed to being part of the public roads. But Indianapolis and Arnage have basically stayed the same. Everything else, though, pretty much everything else, every other part of the track has changed in some way over the course of the last 100 years. And I think, as you said, the run through the Forest S's and Tertre Rouge is a great change. That one was introduced whereabouts was that introduced? The very early days, the oldest Dunlop Bridge, and any motorsport fan will know about the Dunlop bridges that exist around many circuits around the world. The oldest Dunlop Bridge is at the Forest S's in the first chicane, the Dunlop chicane. So that's really cool. But things like the Ford chicanes were introduced because of big accidents, of tragedies that have occurred because cars were coming in too fast to that sections. Places like the Porsche curve have come in to try and slow cars down through difficult cornering to make it more safe. Things like the Mulsanne chicanes rather have come in to continue evolving the circuit to meet FIA regulations, and people were so against the introduction of two chicanes to break up a 5-kilometer straight. But you got to say, it's actually added another dimension to the circuit because, you're now testing everything much more by getting down to those lower speeds and then getting back up to those high speeds again and again and again. The iterations of this circuit are plentiful, and you can go onto Wikipedia and have a look at how the circuit has changed each time. But it still kept that character and still kept the test across the years. Of course, with a 24-hour race, something that does happen is sunrise and sunset. And Jeb,
right.
have you seen an onboard of sunrise and sunset through a car that's competing at Le Mans? Maybe. Well,
I mean, I likely have at some point. I just don't remember it.
Well,
I would imagine I've watched it for 5 years,
yeah.
and I've watched the sunsets and the sunrises. So I'm gonna go ahead and say yes.
Yeah. What happens when you're coming down out of Mulsanne Corner? When you're heading towards Indianapolis and Arnage at sunset?
You can't see anything.
You can't see shit. It's like.
Oh yeah, we can swear. You can't see shit.
Yeah, basically, one of the unique things about a 24-hour race, well, maybe not unique, but you have to drive through these periods of low visibility,
right.
Coming down between the trees at Mulsanne at sunset, you're basically staring directly into the sunset rather, and trying to pass a GT car as you're blindsided as he pops out of the shadows is a pretty hard time. And then sunrise as well. Sunrise over the Dunlop Bridge is I love those pictures.
It's also blinding, but
yeah, I mean,
I do think. Yeah, I was trying to remember the. Funny enough, I was trying to remember the orientation of the track. I was panicking and quickly scrolling around Google Maps. Yeah, I think the Forest S's are one of those corners where it's also a little bit annoying during the sun.
Yeah, in the
sunrise. Yeah, so that's not great being not able to see. But it's interesting. It is a unique aspect of the track. It is having to, maybe not of the track, but of endurance racing is having to race through that, right? Obviously, you have weather and stuff too, but just the changing light conditions. Because you'd actually be surprised how much different a track feels at night. And I know that sounds dumb, but when it's night and it's dark, particularly if it's an area like Le Mans or the Nürburgring where there's nothing lit up, you lose what we would call your sight picture as a driver. You lose your references for here's my turn-in point, here's my braking point, all of that. You lose those because, well, you can't see them.
Yeah.
So you at that point, you get to the point where you have to start being able to drive almost by feel at that point. You have to just kind of know what's coming.
Yeah.
Right?
It's all muscle memory.
Yeah, basically off of muscle memory, which is why the guys who are good at night are usually the better drivers overall.
And as well, there's there's safety in that as well. So each driver must do 5 laps at night in practice in order to be qualified to be able to run in the 24 hours, which I think is a good thing. Because it is a unique thing, and it's not like this is Daytona or Singapore where you've got the circuit lit up by 1,000,001 lights. It's basically effectively almost daytime. This is the middle of the French countryside. There are trees lining the circuit on both sides. There is no street lights. You are basically plunging into the darkness at 300 kilometers per hour with nothing but your headlights to guide the way. Doesn't that sound terrifying?
Yeah, it's well, especially when you think about what people in the 60s thought headlights did.
Yeah, like
even with modern technology, it's not great.
Like, can you imagine like in the late 60s in a Porsche 911, E series, so like a 2-liter engine with that level, like those headlights, and like just trying to drive at all, like trying to drive at like maximum speed as you've got like guys in Ford GTs rapping past you.
No, that sounds like it sucks. Well, it sounds like it'd be awesome, but it sounds like it'd be terrifying.
Yeah, like two sides of the same coin, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of cars, over the 100-year history, there has been a lot of different eras of this event in terms of the cars and the regulations. So, of course, like F1 has its own eras with things like the turbocharged era and the part of time when they were using Formula 2 cars for some reason. I don't know. And then V12, V10, whatever. IndyCar, I'm sure, has had its own history with that event and how cars have been built to be efficient at that event, and sports cars have the same. But of course, for a long time in the early days, this event was people building cars in their garage, especially before the Second World War. It was people building cars in their garage and bringing it to the event to try and test their car versus everyone else. So it's kind of interesting that like the first throws of the event have winners that like we'd never even hear of nowadays. Like, have you ever heard of a Shenard Walker?
No.
A Lorraine Dietrich? Who are these people?
I mean, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Clearly.
But like the thing is, these cars were basically like coaches almost. These were the first iterations of cars, not just race cars, but cars that had been put to this challenge. And it wasn't until after the war that we started to see things like more contemporary manufacturers bringing proper purpose-built cars to race at Le Mans. And I think it really started after the war with Ferrari. They were the first ones to really do it.
Yeah, and I think Enzo's philosophy of selling road cars to finance his race team was definitely something that we still really don't see now. Maybe we're starting to see a comeback, like a resurgence of that nowadays. But I mean, just what an interesting philosophy, especially for the time, right? I mean, you got to think of it in the 50s. That's when the automotive industry is starting to kind of snowball, right? The everyday man is buying the car for his wife and daughter and son. The nuclear family. That's when the automotive industry is booming, and he's like, no, we're not going to capitalize on that and we're not going to be the Henry Ford, right? We're not going to be the Louis Chevrolet. We're going to be Ferrari. We're just going to build race cars, and we'll sell a couple road cars, but we're just selling them just so we can kind of go racing,
And I mean, that's probably part of the reason why Ferrari won, like, 4 in the period of the 50s and 60s? Well, in fact, they won 6 in a row at the start of the 60s, all through just building building cars that people could buy. Because again, in this era, it was very much a lot of people building cars or buying cars and bringing their car to Le Mans and paying some people to drive it to see if they could win. And like you look at like Jaguar, who won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in this period of time. In the D-Type predominantly, it was really, like, while, yes, Jaguar were sending their cars over to race, there was also people who were buying those cars, those D-Types, and going over to race independently.
Yeah, really kind of the first kind of iteration of, I guess, privateering in racing, which we see nowadays too, right? Especially with Proton and Jota and all those guys getting their fancy 963s. But kind of a very rudimentary version of that was guys just buying road cars because they were effectively road cars.
Yeah,
and going, hey, we're gonna go racing. It's really neat to look through old racing results because a lot of times the old racing results, the team like name that is credited is usually just like the guy's last name.
Yeah, like
because it's just him.
Yeah. So, like, for example, in 1956, the Aston Martin DBR1, that one, was was entered under David Brown Racing, who was just a guy who made tools and entered a car.
Yeah, pretty much. Checks out. It's David Brown went racing.
And
sorry,
they won.
that's it.
The real next...
Oh, that's the Carroll Shelby car.
Yeah, that was Carroll Shelby and Roy Salvadori. So, two very notable drivers. But yeah, it just entered under the dude who made tools for Aston Martin. Like, because why wouldn't you?
I mean, you're going to have to use them for a 24-hour race.
Exactly.
Might as well get that branding in there.
Yeah. As well, in the 60s, once we started to get through the era of the garagista into what I would call really the first factory era of racing, where we have teams like Ferrari who are entering cars under their own name and really putting their factory as like, we are building cars specifically to win this race. We also saw like the first sponsorship of cars at Le Mans in the late 60s, and this era in the 60s could really be defined as the battle of Ford versus Ferrari. And if you haven't seen the movie Ford versus Ferrari, I do recommend it because I've heard it's a very, very good movie. But it was really the epitome of that era of racing. You have the people who are building these cars specifically for this event, and all the politics that come behind it. It was really the birth of factory racing almost.
Yeah, and that's. I would argue that there's a distinct change, like a shift that happens in racing around the 60s, where you start getting. You had factories before, but that's where you kind of start getting what we would consider the modern factory team. And actually, you could even argue that's also where you get the modern pseudo factory team.
Yeah,
right?
The modern work.
That's where the dealership teams, right? Where it's like, well, they're not the factory; they're actually representing this dealership, but they're the factory, right? So, and that's kind of like the Ford versus Ferrari, like 65, 66 era, is kind of where that starts. Like that's kind of what I would consider the nucleus of what is very prevalent in modern racing. That's where it starts. It's with Ford going to Shelby and going, all right, like, hang on, let's do something here, right? And it's interesting to see how that has evolved. In some ways, it is still quite the same.
Well, yeah, in a lot of ways, it's still quite the same. But really, that involvement from Ford was the first time that we'd seen a factory en masse build something specifically to win this event. And it was all because, if you don't know the story of Ford versus like the that sort of era of racing, and it was all because Ford wanted to buy Ferrari, and Ferrari basically said, this is Enzo Ferrari, basically said at the last minute, no, I want to control my race team. That is not part of the deal. And so Ford were like, well, stuff you. We're going to win your race that you've won for the last 6 years straight, and you're going to suck it. And there you go. That's basically why the Ford GT exists. Yeah,
I was going to say, and to be honest, they won.
They did. It took them a few years, but they did. But after the Ford versus Ferrari era, something kind of new and kind of special happened. And that was the birth of the prototype. And it was all because of a loophole in the Group 5 regulations. So in 1969, a new set of regulations came in. 1968 it started. A new set of regulations came in that said, because basically the cars are getting too quick, it's too scary, too dangerous. We're going to limit the performance of the cars in our sports car category, but we're going to offer a lower category, Group 5, where you've got to make 25 road-going versions of this car in order to be able to compete. And Porsche were like, hang on. If we build 25 absolutely ridiculous prototypes that you can drive on the road, then we can enter an absolutely ridiculous prototype in this series. And there you have the Porsche 917, arguably the first homologation special. And that kicked off a brand new era of motorsports.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that. It kind of was the first homologation special because that's where you kind of start seeing the tomfoolery aspect of racing, the yes and
the loophole
or
started to be exploited.
the no buts,
Yeah.
right? The no, this is that is yes, this is the luggage tray where you would obviously logically store your luggage on your weekend getaway to your cottage in your 917.
Yeah.
Yep. That's where you start to see the
Bending the rules.
it's bending the rules. I'm trying to you are fulfilling the letter of the law, but you are not necessarily following the spirit of the law, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You officially, that is in fact a container for luggage. Would that traditionally be considered a container for luggage? No. It's in an engine bay. But officially, it does fit a thing of luggage, so it is.
Yeah, and like the birth of the sports prototype in a sense that, like, you know, these cars, these Porsche 917s were bespoke race cars that had been effectively modified so that way they could still race, like run on the road. Like, yes, the Ford GT40 was a race car, but it wasn't a race car in the way that Porsche built their 917. Like, the 917 was always going to be a race car first, and it was, you know, a 12-cylinder, 5-liter engine in an 800-kilogram magnesium chassis. That, like, those words are terrifying when you put them together. But it really kicked off a new era of racing. You know, homologation specials, which turned into prototype racing, which turned into something amazing and terrifying, which was Group C. And, you know, part of Group C was, you know, dealing with the oil crisis and putting in a bunch of regulations to limit fuel usage. But it really turned into one of the most open and competitive regulations that had ever existed. You know, people still talk about Group C, Jeb, as one of the golden eras of motorsport, not just of sports cars, but of motorsport. And if you look at the results, it seems very dominated by one manufacturer, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. It was a smorgasbord of manufacturers racing at the very top of Le Mans.
Right. Yeah. I mean, obviously Porsche. Nobody's perfect, right? Etc. We've all seen the posters, but the really what Porsche also brought to the table too is, and I apologize because I know for a matter of fact we will get comments about me saying Porsche, not Porsche. I don't care.
Naughty boy.
Is cry about it. Get your own podcast.
This is my podcast.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Today will be Josh's last episode of a Nerd Chat. No, but so what they did is they offered. I mean, like with everything I've said previously. Yeah, you can see a little bit of it beforehand, but this is where we start getting into the customer racing aspect of it too. You start seeing privateer Porsches. Right? And this is customer racing may not be the right.
No, absolutely.
Phrasing
customer racing is absolutely right.
Okay, then yeah. So customer racing, because you can see. I mean, if you look at a good example is if you watch any non-Le Mans Group C race. First of all, sorry, because some of them aren't great.
No,
but most of the entry lists are 962s, and they're usually all by a whole bunch of different teams because that was kind of just the car that everybody had. It was good. The parts were available, and it was proven to be a winning car, and that was why they got their nice free. They're nice. They're nice. Let's call it free marketing, and the free marketing was everybody owning one, so they just told all their friends to buy one.
And yeah, as you said, it was a reliable machine that was capable of winning races in anyone's hands. Like you made reference to it beforehand, the Nobody's Perfect poster, very famous poster for the 1983 Le Mans victory, where the top 8 cars were Porsche 962s. Admittedly, well, only the top 2 were the factory, but, you know, you had Andretti Racing in 3rd place, you had Kramer on that list, you had Jost on that list. It was a domination by a brand, partly through weight of numbers, but also because they were the cars that got to the finish. They were the cars that were able to compete at that high level and get all the way to the end of that race and, you know, complete that race. You know, the only car on that list that wasn't a Porsche 956 in that race was a Sauber that finished 32 laps back. And so that's sure, weight of numbers is one thing, but Porsche really invested in that customer base, which is something that still exists this very day. Like Porsche are one of the leading GT brands because their customers are so loyal because they have all this customer support in that.
Yeah, and I think they have that their experience too. It's just the nature of racing is a very interesting industry to try and cater to a customer. And customer service, usually sucks as a job. Customer service in its nature is very difficult, right? But especially in racing, because customer service in racing, you have less opportunities to impress the customer because you don't have as many races in a season as you do, board meetings or whatever. And more importantly, it's a pretty high ultimatum if they're not pleased because the customer's usually out a lot of money or even more money because they've also taken somebody else's race car with them.
Yeah.
Right. So, and more importantly, arguably worse than when the customer crashes your car and then blames you on it, is when your car blows up because of something that is actually your fault. Right. That's not how you, that's not to go corporate for a sec. That's not how you encourage repeat customers.
No.
Encourage people to shop again. Right. So, and that's what Porsche did. And they worked pretty hard to build that was they actually so for the first couple of years, they actually just built the better cars. Right. And then obviously anybody who wanted to go racing was like, well, why would I not buy the best car?
Exactly.
The only obstacle being money. Right. And so if you actually have the best car, which they did with the 956 and the 962, at that point, you basically don't even have to do like, what are our competitors doing? How can we compete with them?
No, because everyone else is asking that question about you.
Yeah, because it's you can kind of take a step back and go, we are the best.
Yeah.
We don't have... So just keep making the cars, just make them better, right? Just make improvements on them to make them more reliable, but the car's already good. You're ahead of the curve. Yeah. You don't have to invest all your money in trying to catch up. You can spend all your money, paradoxically, on making the cars more reliable. So once you build the best car, you no longer have to worry about trying to catch up to people.
Exactly. And Porsche really hit Group C with a hammer and were the best team for the first half of it. They finally got some challenge by Jaguar and Sauber in the later half, but by that point Porsche had won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a row, and were very much at the head of the Le Mans winners list before Jaguar finally overcame that hurdle in 1988, and then Group C kind of died. Unfortunately.
Yeah, it starts to go the way of the dinosaurs at that point.
Yeah. Of course, Group C had existed for a long period of time at that point and had done very well for itself, but the involvement of Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley and Jean-Marie Ballester, which are names that if you're F1 fans, you may recall and you may be aware of, but it kind of all came to a grinding halt in 1991, which saw a bit of a lean period for Le Mans and for sports cars. And if you want to know more about how that all happened, there is a great post by our friend Cookie Monster FL, Austin Zetzman, who has put that up on Reddit. It's called The Death of Group C. So have a look for that because it's a great write-up and really goes into the politics behind why decisions were made by the way that they were and how that played out at Le Mans. Because for a while there, it looked like the event could be on some very, very lean standing. I mean, I think it was the 1993 Le Mans, 1992, where they had 20 entries or 24 entries or something like that. So it was 28 entries for the 1992 event, which is, low.
Remarkably.
Yeah. But we did see a revival. We did see a revival with GT1, the top era of GT racing, you could argue, where, things like the McLaren F1 and 911 GT1 and the Nissan R390 really came to the fore. And that was a pretty cool era, even if it only lasted a few years.
Yeah, it was... The GT1 era is really hard to explain to normal racing, or to normal non-racing people as to why it's so cool, because it's just objectively funny watching every automotive manufacturer try and justify why they've built a sports car, right?
It's just
like trying to justify. Yeah, this is a road car. This is a road car. Yep, fuel tanks in the trunks in the fuel tank, etc. Right? We've all seen the funny jokes, but that was the funny part was watching the manufacturers go, yeah, this is I mean, some of them were. I mean, the McLaren F1 was actually a road car, right?
Yeah, but I mean, like it's a road car that goes 300 and whatever kilometers per hour.
Yeah, it's a road car. It's a road car that's made to go racing. It's like there's a car that is built to be a race car, and they went, oh yeah, we got to make this a road car.
Well, like
bam, turn signals, headlights, second passenger seat, a little bit of room for the luggage. What's the other ones?
Well, I mean,
there you go, road car.
That was the thing, right? It caused manufacturers to make prototypes that were like, sorry, it caused manufacturers to make road cars that were actually just race cars, and like that's why things like the Nissan R390 exist, and there's like 2 examples of it in the world because they really just made a car so that way they could turn it into a race car. Like that was the design philosophy for GT1.
Yeah, pretty much. But that's also led to road cars that sell for an absolutely insane amount of money at auction because of it.
Yeah.
Or serve as really great final unlockables in racing games. Which, I mean, fair. They're cool. I would love to know what the guy who owns the one R390... It's the R390?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think of the car?
I wonder what he's up to.
Yeah.
He should drive that around. Yeah. I mean, I can almost guarantee you he's never driven it.
I mean, yeah.
I want to hear his thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. When GT1 all kind of fell apart, it did give way to a kind of second golden era. Not immediately, but certainly the start of something that was LMP1, the Le Mans prototype, purpose-built race cars for Le Mans. And, this era was dominated by Audi with the R8 and then the R10 and then the R15. Not really the R15, but then the R18. But, it brought in as well the sort of diesel era of racing, using the higher calorific value of diesel as a fuel to develop diesel as a fuel for road cars. And that was the justification behind it. That was the push from manufacturers. They basically said, we want to develop diesel as a technology, so let us race cars or make it better for us to race cars that are diesel. And that's what happened at Le Mans. From 2006 all the way to 2014, cars that won at Le Mans were all diesel powered. And that's a pretty cool way to test your technology, isn't it? Taking it for a 24-hour sojourn around the French countryside.
Yeah, it really, I mean, it also serves to kind of cater to the race on Sunday, saw on Monday.
Philosophy,
around all the time, right? And it also proved the viability of diesel as a race car too. I mean, it didn't really. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm no way an expert on diesels, but that was kind of like we never really had diesel race cars before the point. We did a couple of diesel road cars at that point, but we never had diesel race cars, and so they kind of proved that
diesel race car. No.
Yeah, exactly right. It's. I mean. It really did innovate, and the other key too is the aspect of the diesel engine gave you a lot of torque, which really mattered in a light race car because it meant you could get at corners better.
Especially for a track like Le Mans, where you've got
especially
long
Le Mans,
straights,
yeah, where you need to get out of corners quickly. Exactly. It's the other key too is also with the prototypes being lighter, they don't have as much mechanical grip out of the corner, and so they can't get out of the corner faster because the GT's way more and they put the weight down.
Yeah.
So that torque, it helps with that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, you then have like downforce monsters in these cars. Like the efficiency of downforce that through the early 2000s into the mid 2000s and 2010s really just completely changed the way that racing was done at a sport, in sports cars. That made things like the Porsche curves, for prototypes, areas where you could go flat through the first half of them, which is absurd that you could, possibly go through part of the Porsche curves just absolutely flat to the floor. Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's where we started seeing the speeds that we hadn't seen previously. We still have some records at some tracks set by these cars that have not been beaten, right? Because it was also the peak of kind of spending in top class prototype racing. I mean, the R8s were having custom tire compounds made for them, and they're LMP1 through level, right? I mean, there's the speed. It is amazing even nowadays. We've broken some of these records because just the level of, just straight up level of money that was factory excess money, just work that was going into these cars. It's incredible we've broken some of these records. I thought that would have stood for a lot longer.
Well, that was the thing, because what came after the diesels, Jeb? The hybrids. And
hybrids.
That was a big turning point in modern racing. The idea that you could build a car with a electric motor, like a hybrid electric petrol engine in it, and have it work so efficiently and so effectively. And, you know, the hybrid era of LMP1 racing from like 2012 all the way through to 2017 is arguably one of the best eras in motorsport. You know, for a lot of us who have been watching in modern times, that's the era that we first started watching. You know, I came into watching 24 Hours of Le Mans just prior to the hybrid era in about 2007, 2008. But for a lot of people, this is the first sports cars that they watched. When did you start watching Le Mans?
I'm a bad example. The answer is 2017,
Yeah.
but which is great because I voted 2016. But yeah, that was what. Well, I'm also a lot younger than you, to be
Not
honest.
that much younger.
A decent amount.
Okay, just quick sidebar. When we started this podcast 8 years ago, I was a budding young 20-year-old with the world in front of me. Now to be the one to be like, oh, I'm a lot younger than you now. God damn, that makes me feel old.
Yeah,
Bruh.
sorry. Anyway,
Wow.
Oh, your bedtime's soon. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, no, I started watching in 2017, and even over the last 3, 4, 5, 6 years.
Yeah, it goes quick, doesn't it?
Time flies. You've seen the evolution, he says, looking at back to back Toyota wins.
Lol.
Yeah, I remember when I was a Toyota fan, and then they actually won it, and I was like, yeah. And then they won it the second time, and I was like, yeah. And by the third time, I was like, I'm on.
We will touch on that again.
Yes,
because after the LMP1 hybrid era kind of ended through factory access, through a lot of spending by the likes of Porsche and Audi and Toyota, less so Toyota, but more so Porsche and Audi, the whole thing with the diesel emissions scandal that kind of killed diesel as a race fuel, among other applications.
The main problem was also that they spent 12 years promoting that they were using
clean,
diesels
efficient
as race
fuel,
and it was cool. And then it turned out that they were not actually using clean, efficient fuel through their own virtue willingly.
Yeah.
So I understandably they were like, we're going to stop racing our diesels. Right? That was widely regarded as a good call from everybody outside of racing. But everybody in racing who liked the car had mixed feelings because on the one hand, the R18 e-tron was cool because it was a diesel hybrid. But on the other hand, don't cheat emissions.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Oh, there's a complicated factor behind that.
All in all, neutral on the whole situation. No, I'm kidding.
But what we've had since then, since LMP1, has been this new era, the Hypercar era at the top class of Le Mans. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. We'll talk about the current state of play. But I just want to point something out here quickly before we move on. In the last 20 years, so since 2002, we have had every single edition of the 24 Hours of Le Mans, except for the 2011 race and the 2013 race, wherein we have covered more than 5,000 kilometers. 5,000 kilometers? 5,000 kilometers in 24 hours. 5,000 kilometers.
It's oil change mileage.
That is ridiculous. So that is the kind of level of efficiency we are getting to here. We're almost getting to the point where we're hitting 400 laps of Le Mans, the circuit. And you look at the improvements that we've made over that period of time. So, something that gets quoted is that in 2017, at the peak of the hybrid era, the cars there were using a third less fuel than cars from 10 years prior in the diesel era. A third less fuel and still going, that's 5,000 kilometers in 24 hours. 5,000 kilometers, is that what? Like almost the distance across Canada?
Yeah, actually, I think it is. It's actually pretty close. I know it's far enough where you would need an oil change.
Yeah. 5,000 kilometers is like...
we got a distance check right now. Fact checking right now.
It's ridiculous. Like, to think about how far that is just kind of absurd. Like, I can't actually put it into... Like, my brain just breaks at that thought.
Yeah, it's 5,200
yeah.
across Canada, so yeah, pretty close.
It's like flying from the top of Australia to Hong Kong.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty far.
So, it's kind of absurd when you put it that way.
It's like going from Paris to... Let's get another distance check. Dakar.
Yeah. There you go. It is a Paris-Dakar rally in 24 hours.
Yeah, and then driving another 800 kilometers. But
far out.
They should make a race like that. That'd be pretty cool.
That would be nuts. So that's the sort of level that we're getting to. It's like almost an entire F1 season in one race, which is...
It's an interesting point, too.
Pretty crazy. But let's talk about, Jeb, this year.
Hello.
We've got
big race today.
It is a big race.
Big race this year.
It's the Centenary event. I almost called you Chris. It's the Centenary event, Jeb.
No, not quite. Yeah, you're right.
So you mentioned the Toyota. You mentioned Toyota years. You mentioned Toyota that they won a few races in a row to not much competition. Part of that is, of course, the fact that everyone else has pulled out. But it's hard to really gauge Toyota's success, even though they've won the last 5 in a row, because they haven't really had all that much competition. We talked a little bit briefly. We mentioned how, Toyota's sordid history at Le Mans, coming close to winning in 1994, 1998, 1999, 2014, 2016, 2017. Every single time they got really, really close and failed, it was almost a case of like, will it ever happen? But they've stuck through this lean period, and they have been the team that has reaped the rewards of you'd call it a weakened top class at Le Mans. Weakened is not what we have now. In Hypercar, we have 16 entries for this year's 24 Hours of Le Mans across 2 categories of car, LMH, which are bespoke prototype cars, which are, which I think they fit into a box of drag, a certain drag coefficient. They have a certain amount of power. They have the option of a hybrid, and they have quite a large weight for these cars. I think it's around the 900 to 1,000 kilo mark. And then we're combining that with some LMDH cars, which are based out of the regulations in the US, which are basically upgraded, not spec, but upgraded prototype cars. So they're using the base LMP2 chassis from next season, and then adding manufacturer bodywork, adding manufacturer engines, and a hybrid unit in order to get into that same window. So 16 cars in the top class. We've not had that many cars in the top class at Le Mans in a long time, as far as I can remember. Yeah. And it's exciting. It's exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it really is the new era of sports car racing. I remember having that feeling during the Rolex, kind of going, "Oh wow, like this is what I've been missing out on." You gotta understand, especially joining as a fan in 2017. I missed out on the fun part, which is 2016 to 2010.
Yeah.
For LMP1.
Yeah.
I missed out on that, right? And so now I'm kind of getting watching the Rolex this year and kind of realizing how many manufacturers and how the racing was. I was like, okay, I stuck out long enough. Like this is the reward.
Yeah,
this is the reward. This is what I get for holding out, right? And I'm happy with it, and that's why I can't wait to see it at Le Mans, because there's going to be even more of them, and they're going to be at Le Mans.
So we've got factory entries from Toyota, from Ferrari, from Peugeot, from Cadillac, from Porsche, as well as customer entries from Porsche, and privateer entries from Glickenhaus and Vanwall, which is actually by collars, and racing sports car fans will have a little chuckle about that, and everyone else will go, who? But we've got, 16 cars in the top class. That's basically almost an F1 grid, and based on what we've seen this season, you could say that maybe a half to 2/3 have a legitimate shot at victory in this race. It's quite level across the playing field, even though Toyota have won every race so far this season.
Yeah, I mean, you always get wild things that happen at Le Mans. I never like to think that just because somebody's dominant means they will do well at Le Mans. We've seen cars that have been dominant wreck out of Le Mans, that have mechanicals. There's so much going on with it that I don't like to pick favorites. I always find it pretty hard to choose who I think is going to win Le Mans. But we've definitely got an interesting lineup this year, which was such variety. There's so much. I mean, we're going to be doing an episode in the future on the grid rundown and kind of giving a full briefing for the event, because there really is a lot to unpack this year.
Absolutely. And if you're a new fan jumping in, this is the perfect time to jump in, because what you're watching is the dawn of a new era, effectively. Not just the Centenary event, but the reason that so many manufacturers are here are because of that, sure, but also it's an attractive rule set that has brought a lot of different people to the table. Like 16 cars. The last time Le Mans had a competitive top class was maybe 2015, where you had 12 cars from Audi, Toyota, Porsche, and Nissan in the top class. But even then, like the fact that we have got such a tight window of performance that encapsulates all 16 cars is kind of nuts. And you can't underestimate the Team Red at Le Mans. The fact that Ferrari is back after 50 something years is kind of special.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it just for the history buffs like myself, it is a huge deal having, like you said, just the concept of a manufacturer being out for so long and being back, like with the F1 guys when Alpha came back, right? But also, I mean, they've got good lineups and they've proven that they've had a good car this year. I mean, maybe don't look at the hybrid issues from Portimao, but was it Portimao?
Fine. That's fine.
Yeah,
Don't worry about it.
We fixed it. We're good. We're fine. It's we're good. Yeah, but when you look at, I mean, the car is beautiful, but also just them being back, it kind of shows it's like, okay, like we got the big names here, right? We got Cadillac, like the GM, Chevy, we got General Motors, Porsche, Ferrari, Toyota. Like it's like we're back, guys. We're Peugeot. Sorry, apologize. We're back. Right, like this is going to be it, regardless of what happens. Dude, this could be the most. There could be 0 overtakes in Hypercar this entire race, and it will still be a good race because we'll get to see what these cars actually do.
And I think as well, we'll get to finally see Toyota up against it with actual competition, and whether or not that actually not legitimizes, but like recontextualizes their past success, because it's very hard to contextualize how good Toyota have been when they haven't really had anyone to beat but the event. So that is an entirely different conversation to have, and that's something we'll talk about in our Hypercar preview, which will be coming up at some point in the future, probably.
Right, and I mean, especially just real quick before we move on, I mean, especially with cars we've seen that are optimized for Le Mans, like the Peugeot particularly, right? It will be interesting to see if I know we're going to talk about this in the Hypercar, so I'll keep it short, but it'll be interesting to see because, like, let's be honest, the wingless car is clearly, obviously optimized for Le Mans. Like,
absolutely.
They're not using it for Monza, right? So it will be interesting to see if that actually works, because if it doesn't, they're going to be really upset.
Just a little bit.
If it doesn't, there will be a lot of engineers that are very not happy.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that something designed specifically for Le Mans has not done well, specifically at Le Mans.
Not done well.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Just think back to the Nissan Nismo LMP1 GTR of the Nissan program. Like, sure, that car was half-baked and didn't have an operational hybrid, which meant that the rest of the car kind of broke down. But, like, that would have been an incredible concept had it worked, and it didn't.
Yeah, I mean, that also got messed up by
everything else.
The hybrid supplier decided they just weren't going to be a hybrid supplier.
Yeah,
but
classic.
That's a whole other conversation.
So we don't just have Hypercar in this race. 16 cars would be, a pretty empty race. We also have 2 lower classes in this event, 2 effectively separate races running on the same track, and both of those are absolutely packed with quality. The first of those is LMP2. So LMP2 is basically the lower tier of prototype racing. They are a 550 horsepower, 700-ish kilogram bespoke prototype race car with the absolute peak of amateur motorsports. And this is something we haven't really talked about much yet, is the fact that amateur racing at Le Mans, as in people who aren't professional race drivers, is a key component of the race and of sports car racing. And in this category, you are required to run at least one driver out of your 3 that is an amateur driver, a FIA rated silver or lower. So that is an important factor that plays into this class. But also, Jeb, we have 24 cars in this class, which is more than an F1 grid. It's most of an IndyCar grid, and it's almost as much as a touring car grid in some parts of the world. And it's absolutely packed with talent. You look at drivers in this class like Felipe Albuquerque, Oliver Jarvis, who else is on here that people would know? There's a few F1 drivers here that I'm just trying to find one. Guido van der Garde, former F1 driver. This class is absolutely packed with talent.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, so a lot of people, the problem is a lot of people view P2 drivers as the guys who didn't make it in the big leagues. It's not necessarily true, right? There's just not enough seats in the big leagues.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's why you get really interesting racing in P2, because you usually get guys who honestly are probably overqualified for the role. Just absolutely duking it out in these cars, and because they are all, they're all built roughly to the same regulations. I mean, these are all Oricas, so they are built the same.
So exactly the same car,
the race is that much better. It's like watching racing in like a spec series like an MX-5 Cup compared to like a GT4, right? Like you just do get closer racing because of it. And also the cars sound awesome, they look awesome. They've been around for years, so you know what to expect, and they can race them well and they can run them well and do some good laps, but you also do still get the occasional weird thing that happens, which is, it's always something funny that happens at Le Mans. So I was cutting holes in bodywork, things that shake, you gotta hit them weird, you gotta take a thing out and unplug it and then plug it back in and shake it a bit, and it works, and it only works sometimes, and you gotta hold it while you're driving. That's the fun part, right?
That is endurance racing in a nutshell. I just want to pull out a few other names here that are going to be pretty intense for people to hear about. So we've got in this class as well, Robert Kubica is racing in this class, which is pretty crazy. Manuel Maldonado, the cousin of Pastor Maldonado, is in this class, which is a little funny. There's a lot of drivers who came up through the F1 feeder series ladder and then have pivoted into this sort of racing. So people like Matteo Vaxiviere, Louis Delatraz, who else? It's hard looking at just the list of names. Job van Uitert, who's jumped across. So it's really a class that is absolutely filled with talent. And if you've not watched a lot of sports car racing before, just pick a car. Just pick a car in this class and just track it throughout the race, and it will really make you invested in what is arguably the best series of, or like the best class of racing in the world at the moment.
Yeah, I would actually agree. I'm actually, I'm not gonna go on a rant about it, but I am actually very upset they're getting rid of LMP2. I've always very strongly maintained LMP2 is the class that offers the best racing in sports car racing. End statement. And that's why I always, the problem is P2 often gets swept under the rug, especially now that we have the new fancy hypercars, which is perfectly valid, right? The hypercars are awesome. But the P2s are like your fallback class. If there's not a battle in your top class, P2 always has something going on. Even if it's not necessarily a battle, even if it's just somebody who just decides, I'm going to do a stint that's just the fastest stint of my racing career.
Right?
Yeah, hey, I'm going to go 2 seconds faster over this stint. It's like, okay, well.
Okay, cool.
Why? Yeah, we're an hour 14 of a 24-hour race, but I'm sure,
It is. Go ahead, sorry.
The P2s aesthetically, in my opinion, look the best, maybe the second best compared to some of the hypercars. They sound the best, and they race the best, right? There's a reason this class has stuck around for so long with relatively no modifications apart from me putting a roof on it.
Yeah.
Over in what, like 2016 or something?
2017, yeah.
2017, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it really is the best race. That's why I'm glad to see what the class will do in the future. I mean, IMSA said they're going to keep using them. ELMS, it really is some awesome racing.
Absolutely, and I will continue to spruik LMP2 at anyone who will listen, and that includes you, my friends from work, who have been saying that they're going to get into sports car racing, but they haven't yet. LMP2 is the best type of racing around the world, we're going on about driver talent, but let's talk about team talent as well. In these teams are some of the best engineers and race teams that exist in the world at the moment. You wouldn't recognize some teams from things like F1 feeder series, like Prema Racing, but teams that you might not know, who are absolutely the very best of the best teams in the world, are things like United Autosports, Jota, WRT. WRT completely changed the game when they entered LMP2 for the first time, because they were just the consummate professional, and they blew everyone out of the water immediately. And no one was surprised. No one who knew WRT was surprised that they blew everyone out of the water immediately. But what that has done is that's raised the standard again. So, the guys in United Autosports, in Jota, have come to the party, and it's the best racing, it's the best series in the world. Watch it.
True.
And below LMP2 as well, we also have a quite healthy GT class in what is GTE's swansong performance. After this year, GTE will be phased out and be replaced with GT3. So this is the last opportunity for GTE, which is kind of like GT3 but souped up, to really perform at Le Mans. And it is, for the first time, entirely Pro-Am. So, as we said in the LMP2 section, where you're mandated to have one AM driver. In GTE, you're required to have two AM drivers, one rated bronze and one rated silver. So bronze is like the lowest rating, and then silver is the one above that. But it really, a lot of the pace in this class is determined by your bronze pace. But the series does a lot to actually encourage the bronzes to do a lot of racing. And because of that, we've gotten to see, as fans, a lot of personality from drivers who, in years past, would have just been called mobile chicanes. And, Jeb, I think one of the favourite drivers of the series as a whole is a bronze driver.
Right, yeah. Mr. Keating. Funny enough, I was actually talking about Ben Keating with somebody earlier. But Ben Keating, I mean, just... I'm trying to figure out where to even start with the guy. Probably one of the fastest, probably the fastest AM driver on the open market, to the point where he might as well be considered a factory driver now.
Pretty much, yeah.
For Corvette. And but it still is an amateur driver. I believe he's a car dealer in Texas.
Yeah. So his day job is selling cars, and his night job is racing the cars that he sells.
Racing cars, and he's quite good at it, too. And there's a lot of people that think they can drive race cars that honestly cannot. And Ben Keating's one of the guys who's like, I think I could drive a race car, and hopped in a race car, and it turns out it's incredibly good at driving a race car. And as a result of which, any manufacturer, any team ever that needed to have an amateur driver saw Ben Keating on the market win everything and go, and the teams collectively went, huh. So Corvette picked him up, and he was with would it have been Riley?
So yeah, he and Riley Motorsport have always had a really, really close relationship. But Keating's philosophy is he always wanted to race cars that he could sell, and in that, he has jumped around a few different times to a few different things. So in Le Mans, I believe he's raced a Porsche, he's raced a Corvette, he's even raced a Ford GT.
Raced the Ford GT, yeah.
The only customer driver team to ever race the Ford GT was given to Ben Keating. And he's raced an Aston Martin as well for TF Sport. It was with Team Project One for a while. He's had a dip in a lot of different things. But I think that just shows the quality of Ben Keating as a driver as well. And this is, by the way, this is like your most stereotypical Texan dude in his like mid-50s as well. Like, if you haven't seen the WC Full Access from Sebring, watch the intro to that to get an idea of Ben Keating as Ben Keating the man, because it's basically like you couldn't come up with a more Texan guy, effectively.
Today I learned Ben Keating is only 51 years old. I thought he was a lot older.
He's young at heart, and that's definitely true.
Yeah.
But that aspect of having a bronze driver, someone who spends most of their time not racing cars, really makes this class probably one of the most topsy-turvy classes, but also gives it a lot of personality. So I would suggest, again, if you're new to this event, pick 1 or 2 or 3 cars in this entry list, something that jumps out at you, whether you're a big fan of big American V8s and you want to support Chevrolet, or you look at that beautiful pink Porsche of the Iron Dames and go, damn, a car with 3 ladies that are actually competitive, I want a piece of that. Or if you look at the entry list and see, you know, a name that you recognize, like, say, Michael Fassbender, and you go, hey, that's that TV guy. What is he doing in this motor race? I'm going to follow that car because, yeah, it's that TV guy, and he races cars.
I mean, yeah, that's an accurate... Don't know what Michael Fassbender does as a day job.
Now you do. He's an actor. He was in that Assassin's Creed movie that no one knows about.
I was looking for the other actor that is Ville with Proton Competition, but he's not in this, I don't see.
No, unfortunately not. But he is there as a team name. Oh,
there you go.
For a while there, Patrick Dempsey was racing at Le Mans for Proton Racing, but he doesn't do that anymore, which is really sad. But there's a lot of personality in this class. You just got to kind of look and find it. So, keep your ears out for a GCM preview that we'll do as well, to go through all of these drivers, tell you a bit about where they're from, so that way you can, follow a car and see what it's like. And because let's be real. GT racing is incredible because of how close all the cars are, and GTE at Le Mans is even more so. And this season, we haven't needed the GTE Pro class. There used to be a Pro class which had like full factory efforts that was just like absolutely bonkers and, you know, door-to-door door banging or whatever. But we haven't needed that this year because the GTEM has done exactly the same, and it's been awesome.
Yeah, it really... GT racing is always quite interesting, especially just because of the nature of the cars being a little bit beefier. Because every once in a while they will bounce off each other, which is kind of funny. But they just drive a lot different compared to the prototypes, which is what makes them fun, particularly if it starts raining. Because the GTs usually get the mechanical grip. A GT will obviously handle differently in a rain, but a prototype will handle a lot more differently in the rain.
So,
and that's the splice of life. That's what makes things interesting.
And remember as well, you've got basically 3 races running at the same time. So the GT cars embroiled in their own battle will be obstacles for the prototypes to come through. And that is when I think sports car racing at its very best. And the 24 Hours of Le Mans does that very, very well. There's one more car on the entry list, Jeb. And it is a bit of a tradition for Le Mans to have an innovative car. It used to be called Garage 56 because it used to be the 56th entry. But this year, it's something a little different, something from your neck of the woods. Not quite, but around your area. Tell us about the Garage 56 entry, the innovative car.
So the innovative car this year is effectively a NASCAR Next Gen Cup Series car that is on crack. They made modifications to make it race for the longer races, bigger tank, a little bit more aero, and by a little bit more aero, I mean a lot more aero, a lot more splitters, a lot more aero on the back, and creature comfort for the drivers, mainly a little flaps so they can get out a bit better. Because these cars don't have doors, so that'd be fun. But yeah, it's being kind of spearheaded by Hendrick Motorsports, who are a staple in NASCAR. I believe they hold the NASCAR team record for most wins, and are generally regarded as good. So he'll know how to run a car, right? I mean, Hendrick has been running race cars since way before I was even thought of, and so he'll be good at that. In terms of the driver lineup, an all-star lineup: Jimmy Johnson, who's 7 NASCAR championships, Mike Rockefeller, who is there, and Jensen Button.
Wow, that's so rude to Rocky.
No, I'm kidding. No, Rockefeller is I just couldn't name any stats for him off the top of my head. He definitely has a lot of attributes. I just could not remember them. And then Jensen Button's also there. The interesting part, though, about this lineup is that Jimmy Johnson, this is a developing situation. Jimmy Johnson is obviously supposed to be in this car. It's a bit of a big deal. But the problem is that Jimmy Johnson is also going to be racing in the Coke 600, which is NASCAR's race, the longest race, and it's tomorrow. The problem is, as of the time of recording, 10:43 p.m. and 37 seconds on the Eastern Seaboard.
Oh my God!
It is raining in Charlotte, and it is going to rain for the next 2 days. And the problem is they might have to push that race to the Tuesday. And Jimmy Johnson has said if they push the race to the Tuesday, that means he can't go to Le Mans to do his rookie testing or some of his practice stuff. And so that puts him in an interesting situation. Don't know what that means, right? Don't know what that means. Don't know if he doesn't do that, he can't do Le Mans. But he has said he was supposed to be in Le Mans for his rookie competitor training on Wednesday, and if they postpone the race from tomorrow, he might not make it in time. From what it sounds like, what he said is if they postpone it from tomorrow, he will not make it in time. I don't know how that works. It officially is just listed as rookie competitor training, which makes me think it's like a meeting. There's no way it's on track activity.
So what it is, it's a simulation test. So as I said, okay. that there's a regulation that during the lead up to the event, to the race, every driver's going to do 5 laps at night in order to qualify for the race. If you haven't raced at Le Mans before, they make you do a training session wherein they throw a bunch of different scenarios at you passing in traffic at night, all those sort of things, so that way they can check that you're up to scratch. And drivers have been excluded off the basis of their rookie training and of their on-track activity in the lead up. Last year, we had a driver, Felipe Simodomo, who was involved in 3 accidents in the practice sessions, who as a result, got excluded from the event. So, you must be at a certain standard to be allowed to race here. And, that's, it doesn't matter if you're a Cup champion or an IndyCar driver or someone who's, won 1 million races on the other side of the world. If you are not able to race at the standard that Le Mans dictates, then you won't be allowed. So I'm not sure if they will waive it. Jimmy Johnson has done multi-class racing at Daytona in the last 5 years or so he might be able to sneak through on that. But it's tight.
It'll really depend, and I'd imagine they might be able to reschedule it. It's not like he was being negligent, right? He had a contract and then, got messed up because weather happened.
Yeah.
Right?
And
quite literally an act of God.
Drivers have been waived from their rookie test. I think when the 4GT program was introduced, which contained a lot of IndyCar drivers, because IndyCar had an event the same day as the rookie test, the guys the like of Sebastian Bourdais et al. Were able to be waived from the rookie test because, Sebastian Bourdais a multi-time IndyCar champion, has raced
4 times IndyCar champion.
So,
he's probably
fine.
Yeah, I understand that they still want to respect that. They still need to do their test rate because it is a different level, different type of racing. But they might waive him, especially because it's an innovative car, right? It might be like, well, you're not really fighting for anything, but it also is a very different innovative car.
This is true.
It'll be an interesting development regardless. We'll be able to talk about it in our GTM
preview
episode.
Yeah. So.
Or alternatively, the skies clear up in Charlotte tomorrow. This entire conversation was for nothing.
Brilliant. No one will know. If it wasn't for nothing, I'll just cut it and no one will know.
Oh, there you
go. So that's the current state of play across the 3 classes that make up Le Mans this year. There's a few other things that, if you're watching for the first time, you should know. So we've talked about the driver ratings. There's also limits on driver times. So I believe it's any driver cannot do more than 4 hours of any 6. And you can't be in the car for more than, I think it's also, I think it's 3 hours in a row. And that's all about driver management and driver safety. So trying to, manage your drivers, your strategies around the likes of, making sure your pro driver's in the car when you're at the best, using the best tires and all that sort of stuff, and making sure your AM driver fulfills the requirement, because the AM driver also has to do a minimum of 6 hours. So there's a few different pieces of the puzzle that really set up the event. Now, Jeb, what's your thoughts on the AM driver minimum time? Is that something that is important for the, well, not that it's not important, because of course it's important for the race, but is that something that you think should be mandated, or should it be just left up to the drivers themselves to manage that?
I think it should be mandated for the AM time. I don't know, because then you get weird situations where you get a yellow and a team pits and they put the AM in for 1 lap and then they pull them back out again, and it's not as,
the Ed Jones strategy.
It leads to it leads to cop-outs. And so I think having at least some sort of minimum drive. Now, that being said, I don't think I would make the minimum drive time too high. I would make it a decent amount. The main key is so in a perfect world, if your AM driver isn't that bad, you wouldn't have a problem going over the minimum time, right? You'd go, okay, well, just put him in the car, whatever, right? But there are some AM drivers that are simply just not good, right? Let's just be honest. There are some AM drivers that are not good at driving race cars. And so you need that minimum in there in order to keep that aspect of it, because otherwise then there would be no motivation to hire an AM driver.
Well, it's not really hiring an AM driver. The AM driver is often the one who's bringing the money to the team.
Yeah, that is a fair point, but you wouldn't have a reason to basically, I feel like not having a minimum would just lead to a lot of arguments within teams about amateur drive time.
Yeah, that's fair.
Right. And so, no, I don't know for sure. I'm not saying that every single team's going to be arguing like that, but I don't know.
it's a very difficult.
It's definitely it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it's a difficult balancing act because of course you want to be fast, but also the AM drivers need to have an effect on the results. So I think 6 hours for the AM driver, which I'm pretty sure is the current regulation. A quarter of the race, that's a pretty good chunk, and also it leaves enough room for strategy. So I remember a few years ago when Ben Keating was driving in the Ford GT, they backloaded all of his drive time, so they did all 6 hours in the last 10 hours of the race. And the reason for that was that it was the best conditions for the car, the fastest conditions on track, and they'd seen that they'd already built a significant lead at that point that Keating was almost able to hold on to. So that was an interesting strategy, an interesting way of doing things, and it allows for that sort of ebb and flow of the race to happen. So that's the drive time regulations. So yeah, every AM driver must do 6 hours. That's bronze and silver drivers, and no driver can do more than 3 hours in a row, and no driver can do more than 4 of any 6. So a few little pieces to try and put together there. What about the stint lengths of these cars, Jeb? If I'm putting on a fresh set of tires and a full tank of fuel, how far do you reckon I could get in each of the classes?
In terms of time-wise, though, about 45 minutes for the P2s. The Hypercars,
about 50?
Probably, yeah, but a little bit long, like around there, but a bit longer. GTs, I think, consistently go about an hour. Right?
Yeah.
The GTs on like doing about an hour stint is pretty much like the standard in the industry nowadays. It's like your GT car will go an hour.
Exactly, yeah. And yeah, you're pretty much bang on 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and about 50 minutes. So again, trying to fit the puzzles of driver time around your stint lengths is an interesting sort of mix there. And as well, something that people from other series might not know is that when you're doing your pit stop, you've got to have the engine turned off, which forces reliability concerns of restarting the engine every single time. But B, you can only refuel and change tires separately. So that means that you can fuel the car, but once the fueling stops, then you can start changing tires. And the changing tires, takes a significant amount of time. So you kind of have to weigh up how much you're going to gain with new tires versus how long it's going to take to change them. And that leads to some fascinating strategies because you can run the risk of completely running out of tire and losing a lot of grip by choosing not to change them. But on the other hand, if you can hold on to half a second a lap of drop off over the course of a stint, then the 25 seconds it takes to change the tires might actually be a disadvantage.
Yeah, that's where the strategy aspect comes in. Le Mans does offer a weird section, a weird section in like the strategy department where, because it is one of the few tracks like the Nürburgring, stuff like that, where it is your stints are long distance but low lap count. And so that's where you start running into really weird situations of like, oh, well, we save a little bit of fuel over a stint and we get an extra lap. And it's like, well, when your lap's that long, that's
hard.
Not really feasible.
Yeah,
right?
That's hard.
You kind of need a miracle, but more importantly, your numbers need to be more accurate because if there is a problem, it's a very long distance back. Right.
And we've seen cars run out of fuel in the pit entry.
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah, they run it really, really close to the end here. So there's a few things that and safety. Something else as well. The safety car procedure, like. That's something that's going to be new for this year, and we'll talk a little bit about explaining how that works. But there's two different kinds of ways that race control can neutralize the race. The first one is the slow zones. So there's 9 sections around the track where the race control can implement I think it's 60 kilometer per hour limit, and that basically keeps the race flowing without having to neutralize the whole race. I quite like the slow zones. Jeb, what's your opinion?
Yeah, no, I love the slow zones. I think they're a really good compromise to the local yellow were good, and then having to throw a safety car for stuff like that. I think the slow zone, when done correctly, which it usually is the perfect compromise in that department, right? Because it allows for like track surfaces and stuff like that to be safely done, but it also allows the race to keep going. Right. For me, it is the perfect middle ground of like on the situation.
Yeah, but when a safety car does need to be called, Le Mans does something pretty unique. So there's not one safety car, there's actually 3 safety cars. So one at the start-finish straight, one that pops out at the Mulsanne, the first chicane in the Mulsanne, and then one that pops out, I believe it's at Arnage. But they're doing something a bit different this year. Now, Jeb, do you feel confident in telling us about what they're doing?
Little bit. Okay, so basically, they're going to use a yellow. They're going to use a safety car, right? If they have to use a safety car. And then what they're going to do is they're going to have the 3 safety cars like they do normally, I'm pretty sure, right? I got to remember. 3 normals, they come by, they open the pits, you can pit, they close it, tail goes by, you open it back up, you can catch a safety car, right? But it sounds like basically when they get to near the end of the safety car period, what I would describe as possibly the one to go part, they are going to have both of the 2 of the 3 safety cars pit, and then whichever safety car has the leader will stay out, and then everybody will catch the leader. Well, everybody will catch what is now the safety car. I don't actually remember what happens at that point. I think that's where they do their wave buys, right?
Yeah, so they do a series of wave buys and drop backs to sort of split into class orders.
Effectively a class split.
Yeah.
It's like an IMSA class split, but it's just a little bit weirder. And then the safety car will pit once the safety car period is almost done. Safety car will shut its lights off, it'll pit, and then we'll go racing again, and everybody will be all grouped up, and it'll be nice.
It's a pretty interesting way of doing things, because what you're going to end up with is 60 cars all going green at the same time at the same point of the circuit, which is kind of nuts.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. In all honesty, I did prefer the old 3 safety car method. I think the problem that they're trying to solve is, like I said, like we saw it, I think it was 2016, where the GT battle got broken up because of it. Now, I would imagine there are probably better ways of doing it than this. Officially, this does solve the problem. It groups everybody up. It's preserved the battles, right? But the problem is it doesn't preserve the gaps. Now, no safety car will preserve the gaps, right?
Yeah, that's why the slow zone's good.
That's why the slow zone is good, right? But there are some situations where you kind of just need a bit more than that, right? And so it's I don't know. It's such a such an odd topic.
Yeah.
It's
a difficult problem to solve.
It is. It's like it's on. So here's the thing. Regardless what your thoughts are on it, I think we've watched a race that has been long, and you're just like, we gotta bunch things up. Like we nothing's saying, nobody's battling anybody. We need a safety car. We just bunch things up. But we've also been watching races where there's an incredible battle going on, or somebody has a good lead through just straight merit, and then a safety car comes out and all that's gone
and ruins everything.
Right. Yeah, right. Like it's so hit or miss as to whether or not. Because I've had friends who are like diehard like racing fans, as in like, they're all about like proper official racing, Formula One, all that, blah blah blah. Like it's, they are sophisticated, right? They're not just like yeehaw. And I have had those people say to me, yeah, we need a yellow to bunch things up. Like, this race is getting stale, right? But I've also had people who are, all about the show and they want the action say that they don't like safety cars because it artificially bunches people up. They want it to be natural, right? There's so many aspects there's so many aspects to the topic, especially with the single safety car at Le Mans.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out. I think the one that you talked about, the GT battle being broken up in 2016, part of the issue for that as well was that the BOP that year was so close that no one had a chance to really catch up the gap without the leader making a mistake. Because you could only gain like 1/10 of a second a lap. And, if you've gained a minute and a half through a safety car split, then 1/10 of a second of a lap is not going to cut it. So it's going to be an interesting way of doing things and to see whether or not it improves the racing product or doesn't. So we shall see. Jeb, we're getting close to the end of the podcast here. A few things I wanted to ask you, just as a little discussion to end it. For those who might not have watched a 24-hour race before, one of the questions they might have is, how the hell do you watch a 24-hour race? Jeb, how the hell do you watch a 24-hour race?
Buy a ticket. That's what I did.
it.
No. So yeah, this is actually really good. I remember having the conversation post race. So here's this is gonna really piss a lot of people off. Our DMs are open. Feel free to DM me if you disagree with me. I'll ignore it. The key to watching a 24-hour race is not to watch all 24 hours.
What?
That's the actual key to watching a 24-hour race.
What?
Because as somebody who has tried to watch 24 hours of a race, you don't remember all of it. That's where you get was it 20? I think it was 2017. No, was it 26? That's where you get that. You get that from being tired because you didn't watch all the race. The human body cannot watch 24 hours, one thing for 24 hours straight.
No.
You need to take breaks. That's the other key too, especially even if you're like, well, I don't really care, Josh. I'm gonna stand up, and I know I did an accent. I'm gonna watch all 24 hours myself. You know what? Good luck to you. God bless you. I hope that goes well. But stand up every hour. Get a drink. Take a shower. You'd be surprised how sweaty you get just sitting in your chair just because you get excited watching Le Mans. Get up, take exercise, eat food. Don't drink energy drinks. Drink energy drinks if you want, but it's not going to go well.
Absolutely. A point on that: energy food will do better for you than energy drinks.
Energy food, yes.
Have some toast and some cereal.
Yes, absolutely. Well, maybe don't mix them, but race. Someone in the chat says, race fans taking showers impossible. Please, I trust you. There are people out there. You guys can do it. Believe in me. You have the power.
But you make a good point.
Take care of yourself. I mean, if you are actually going to do the 24 hours, take care of yourself, right? Take breaks, stretch. Don't, because, I mean, just sitting for 24 hours will hurt you.
Yeah.
You will be in pain, right? But if you're not adamant on watching all 24 hours, take breaks. Take sleep. Go to bed. Sleep for like 6 hours, 7 hours. If you want to, get a full 8 hours. You're only going to miss, what, third of the race? It's not great, but, it's not that much. Sleep overnight. Sleep through the morning. It's,
because there's nothing...
Go to bed at midnight, wake up at 6.
There's nothing worse than falling asleep late in the 24-hour race that you've tried to stay up through and missing the end.
Right, exactly.
So, take care of yourself. And the best thing about a 24-hour race is that when you go to bed, you wake up and they're still going. So you can just catch up on everything that you've missed.
Exactly. It's well, more important. The key is, here's my opinion. So if the unfortunate part is this requires you to sleep through the early morning, which A, is not a foreign concept, and B, you do miss some of the shenanigans on commentary.
Yeah.
Or weird parts of race cars, right?
Classic.
But if you go to bed at like midnight and you wake up at like 6 a.m., that's 6 hours. I mean, like that's all right.
That's a normal big weekend. Like, that's totally fine.
Yeah, it's like 6 hours for one night is like, you'll probably be fine.
And if
maybe don't operate heavy machinery.
Yeah.
But when you wake up at 6 a.m., like, you'll be able to then watch the rest of the race, right?
Yeah. And like, it's not always about being there for every little thing that happens. People will catch you up if you've missed things. I used to joke that, like, sleep is for the weak. That's why racing happens on the weekend. But as I've gotten a little bit older, definitely just, like, take a break, get some sleep. Like, one of my favorite things to do during Le Mans is, like, to actually have the race on while I'm sleeping. Like, just to have the cars zooming around and just kind of tune in and out, and then just, like, obviously not loud, but, like, just to have it as kind of background noise, as ambient noise. But it is, you really need to take care of yourself, because the amount of stories I've heard of people who have missed things right at the end of the race because they've fallen asleep in the last hour or the last 2 hours is not a fun time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
I mean, it's sports car racing, right? Like, let's be real, folks. Let's be real, folks. It's sports car racing. There's a lot of time where nothing happens.
Well, that's not. That's not it's a bad.
No, sorry. Not much happens. It's still interesting, right? But let's be real. Like, there are sometimes where you'll hit a period, and it's like,
it's just
you don't have to. You do not have to focus on this period to the point where your body would not be resting and recovering, right? There is every once in a while where you're just like, yeah, like this is a highlights section. This is a section where it's like they ran through the night without issue. cool. Use that section to go to bed, right? I mean, obviously you cannot predict incidents. Right? I'm not saying go, oh well, they're going to wreck in 3 hours, so I'll be sure to be awake for that, right? But take care of yourself. Even if you're just going to do I'm going to nap for 2 hours and I'll wake up and I'll nap for another 2 hours. It's not a great sleep schedule, but you're at least still not just staying up straight for 24 hours. Yeah. The sleep is the biggest part of it.
It's like watching Test cricket for those on my side of the world. You can watch all day and nothing will happen, but the one time you look away, something will happen. It's a bit like that. If you've got it on for when you can tune in when things are happening, then that's a kind of a great way of doing it. I always make sure that I'm watching for the transition from darkness into light. That is my favorite part of the race. That golden hour period where the sun rises and the cars go super fast. Brilliant.
I'm the opposite. I enjoy the sunset.
Is that because it's like at a normal time for you?
Maybe, but even the sun coming up in Le Mans is still like a pretty reasonable time for me. Really, I mean, so it's like 1 or 2, but I don't know. I find that the sunset. I don't know, the sunset shots look cool, and vibe looks cooler to me.
It's true. I do love the sunset. The problem is it's like 4:30 in the morning for me, so that's often when I'm sleeping. The race kind of goes through a few phases. So like there's kind of the charge into darkness, the run through the darkness, and then the fatigue of the light. When the race goes back into day on that second day, it's almost as if everything is just a bit fatigued, and that's when you see often a lot of the biggest accidents is in that period of the race. So that's always something to look out for. What is your favorite period of the race?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably like the midway point.
The midway point? So the middle of the night?
Maybe. Yeah. I don't know. That's a really good question. But yeah, I don't know, actually. I mean, I like all of it, but I really don't know.
Well, that's a good answer. You like all of it.
Yeah, there you go. I like all of it. Yeah. None of them are my favorite.
It's like all my children. I love you all equally, except
I love all my.
I like the run into sunset the most.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna say like sunset, or the bit before sunset, and then the 3 hours after sunset.
Nice.
Basically, once the fireworks kick off, what they usually do is like 11, 12 local. It's like, yeah, and then about an hour after the fireworks, it's like, all right, it's my time to check out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's all right. We're hitting sleepy hours, right? And then we sleep, and then we wake up as the sun, and the keys are gonna be as the sun comes up, right as it, when you hit the twilight, then you get up.
Yeah, that's a good time. It's a good time. Finally, what sort of things can help your Le Mans watching experience? If you're watching for the first time, what would you suggest to someone in order to enrich their experience? What sort of things should they have on hand?
Yeah, so first things, get a good coverage of the race with broadcast, whether that be through TV if you're watching it, or Radio Le Mans, or other web sources, stuff like that. Like TV channels and stuff like that. Get your live timing up. The ACO, the Le Mans does have a live timing function. Set it to expert mode so you can actually know what's going on.
And that will help you. That might be a bit overwhelming for the
new people. Yeah, for the new people it might be, but what I think it does is get your stream, watch your race. Second monitor, or on a phone or whatever, if you are so inclined. Pull up the live timing, because it might allow you to follow the race a little bit better. It might. It's one of those things where live timing can very easily confuse you and turn you off, but it can also very easily enrich your experience.
Yeah.
Enrich your experience, right? Because if you have a battle that you are trying to follow, well, it's not always going to be on TV, right? So you can, if you're inclined, look at the timing and see how it's going, right? Or see if it's ended and you've wasted your time. That I find is pretty helpful. Print out your spotter's guide. Get your spotter's guide. There's a reason it's called a spotter's guide. It's because it helps you spot things, right? Get your spotter's guide. I think Andy Blackmore does it for the WC.
So Andy Blackmore hasn't been doing it for a little while.
No!
Yeah, I know, right? But we will have, there's one made by one of the members of the ISSWC subreddit, Ziombel444, or he goes by Groziak Mateos on Twitter. He's been doing a fan-made, fan-sourced spotter guide, not just for Le Mans, but for a bunch of different events around the world. In fact, this year he actually got commissioned to do the spotter's guide for all of the Creventic 24-hour series, so well done to him. But he puts up a spotter's guide on a spotter's, what's his website? Spotters.guide, and that will be linked in all of the race threads on the subreddit, all of the preview threads, and in the Discord as part of our resources as well. So pick that one up, because that will have all the cars, all their numbers, all the drivers, all their driver ratings, all the liveries, so you're able to tell who's driving what, when, and what they look like.
Yeah,
and that's super important.
Oh, and you can also play along with our favorite game, which is the Black Mark of Doom.
Yes,
and start crossing out the cars that do not make it.
That is always a tradition. I'd also suggest having something else on during the race, whether that is like something that you're building. Like I've just picked up the Peugeot 9X8 Lego set, so that's something that I'll be doing during the race. Or being involved in the community, whether that be on Discord here in the live chats. They can get pretty hectic, but they're also a good source of information on the subreddit, on the comment thread there.
So anything you can stick your time into in the background. Minecraft, it's another good one. Shout out Minecraft. Other video games are available. Something you can dedicate attention to, but shift your focus between.
Yeah,
right? The proverbial YouTube video during your dinner, right?
Something like that.
It's something like that, right? Now, not mandatory. I mean, you could just watch the race for 24 hours straight. If you get bored, it's probably because you're just watching, wide shots, especially at night. It's probably just because you're watching shots of headlights for like 12 hours straight.
I love that though.
If somebody told me that was boring, I would go, yeah, no, I understand that.
I don't. I love that. That is like.
No, it's so it is cool, but like if for the new viewer, right? Just looking at like white orbs for 8 hours might be a bit weird, right? So do multiple things. Also get some snacks too. I usually like to buy my snacks the day before the race.
Yeah.
If you're also thinking about taking breaks, though, because we were talking about taking breaks and staying healthy earlier, I mean, you could do it during the race. I would maybe do it, try and find a lull to just quickly pop out, grab some stuff. That might be part of your breaks. I know we have people in the Discord that take walks during the race.
And like you can listen along to the commentary as well. That's something you absolutely can do.
Exactly. It's absolutely just chucking your earbud in.
And I would say as well, for the first time viewer, pick a car in every class to follow. Pick a car in every class, because that'll keep you
play Fantasy WC.
That'll keep you invested in what's happening in the lower classes. Because as you made mention, Josh, the lower classes can sometimes fall a bit under the radar. And there should be there's fascinating things going on, because every single car in this race will have its own story. And I think if you're able to follow on the story of a car that you might not have thought about before, that'll really enrich your experience of watching the race. Because in a race with 62 cars, that's 186 drivers. So there's a lot going on outside of just the very top of the race. And I think for first-time viewers, that's something that's new and scary and weird, but just pick one car in every class, just to sort of follow, and that will help you contextualize and enrich your experience of the race, I think.
Yeah, I think that covers the base.
Absolutely.
Covers the bases.
So Le Mans Track Action kicks off a week from recording this, so we're currently recording this on, for me, Sunday. For Jeb, I think it's Saturday. But basically, we started halfway through what Le Mans would have been. So a week from today will be the test day, where all the drivers and cars will be out for the test. Then they'll have pressage through the town of Le Mans, the scrutineering and all the media stuff. And then track action starts on Wednesday. On Wednesday, the 8th of June, I think. 7th of June. 7th of June. Damn, I missed it up. But there will be practice sessions. There will be a qualifying session. The top 6 from each class in qualifying will graduate into Hyperpole, which is basically like a shootout, effectively. A very, very short, no-holds-barred qualifying session. Then there'll be more practice, and then there will be the race that starts on, I think it's 4 p.m. Central European time on Saturday. of I think that's the 10th of June, and that's the Centenary event for Le Mans 24 Hours. Can you believe that this event has been going for 100 years? Well, sorry, it started 100 years ago.
Yeah. It is really crazy to think about just the nature of how much has happened at that one venue. When you think about everything that has happened throughout the years, it's crazy. That's why I'm really excited for Le Mans this year. I'm excited for Le Mans every year, but this year additionally. So yeah, I mean it's I can't wait. It's starting to. I mean, it's already like a little over a week ago or a week away, and I'm starting to get like that. All right, let's go. Pretty anxious, like a kid with Christmas. But yeah, I mean, I'm hoping this year's, if it's the Centenary, I'm hoping it's going to be a good one. It sounds like the ACO has I've been working pretty hard to make this a good one. So
yeah, and as well,
so I have nothing but high hopes.
Yeah, I think this is a good year to join because there's a great sense of expectation, but like hopeful expectation. Everyone's keen to see what happens. So there's the support categories as well. There's Porsche Carrera Cup and also Road to Le Mans. I think the Sunday races before the main event are streamed, so that'll be good. And both Carrera Cup and Road to Le Mans are pretty damn fun. There's normally
good racing.
Yeah, absolutely good racing. The Friday is generally a rest day for the main category, so no racing on the Friday. And then the big build up to the race on Saturday. There's also going to be a series of car kind of displays, parade laps of a bunch of race cars that have won at Le Mans in the past. Something like 70 cars being paraded around, which will be very, very cool as well. So yeah, it's going to be an absolute festival of motorsport. So I hope you've enjoyed our little preview, which has turned into a long preview. I hope you found something in this that will enrich your Le Mans experience. Thank you very much for joining me, Josh.
Yeah, no, thanks. I appreciate you having me. I can't wait to be here for the previews for all the classes.
Yeah. That'll be our next thing, so that way you'll get up to date with all the drivers and all the classes and everything. Hopefully, you've grabbed something out of this that has been helpful for you. And I hope we'll see you in the race threads on Reddit or in the Discord community on the Discord, of course. And that you enjoy what is going to be an absolute festival of motorsport. I'm Michael Zalavari. Thank you very much for listening. Peace out.
Oh, that's a good question. Say what you were going to say while I think about this.
Well, I was going to say silent thinking is one of the most enthralling parts of audio content. So I really appreciate you thinking in silence for a little while.
Yeah, no problem.